The Fall of the Last Emperor of China. Part 1. A Child on the Dragon Throne. At the very beginning of the 20th century, China was already tired. For more than 2,000 years, emperors had ruled the land as sons of heaven. Dynasties rose and fell, but the idea of empire endured. By 1908, however, the weight of history had become unbearable. Foreign powers pressed at China's borders. Reformers argued with conservatives, and ordinary people felt that the old world was cracking. Into this moment of decay and tension was born a child named Pui. He was not born to rule. He was not prepared. He was barely aware of the world. Pui was only 2 years old when palace officials arrived at his family home with an imperial decree. The Guangxu Emperor was dying. The Empress Dowager Cixi, the real power behind the throne, needed a successor, someone malleable, someone young. Pui was chosen. The child was taken from his mother, screaming and confused, and carried into the heart of Beijing, the Forbidden City. Behind its vast red walls and golden roofs, he was crowned Emperor of China. He became the ruler of the Qing dynasty without understanding what an emperor was. From that moment on, Pui lived in a strange, sealed universe. Servants bowed to him. Eunuchs obeyed his every word. No one said no, yet he had no freedom at all. He could not leave the palace. He could not choose his friends. Even his emotions were tightly controlled by ritual. The court treated him not as a child, but as a symbol. Outside the palace walls, the world was changing fast. Railways cut through the countryside. Newspapers spread radical ideas. Students spoke of republics and constitutions. The old Confucian order, obedience, hierarchy, divine emperors, felt increasingly out of place in a modern, humiliated China. In 1911, when Pui was just 5 years old, the unthinkable happened. A rebellion broke out in Wuhan. Provinces began to declare independence from the empire. Soldiers mutinied. Officials defected. What began as unrest became a revolution. It would be remembered as the Xinhai Revolution, though there was nothing sporting about it. Inside the Forbidden City, the child emperor played with toys, unaware that the empire beneath him was collapsing. The dragon throne was already empty in spirit. Only the child remained, and soon even that would change. Part 2, the abdication. In early 1912, the empire was finished. The revolution had spread too far to be stopped. Provincial leaders no longer recognized imperial authority. The army was divided. Foreign powers watched carefully, ready to take advantage of chaos. At the center of all this stood a 5-year-old boy who had no idea what was happening. The task of ending 2,000 years of imperial rule fell not to Pui himself, but to the adults around him. Courtiers, generals, and politicians trying to control the collapse. The most important of them was Yuan Shikai. Yuan was a powerful military commander, ambitious and deeply pragmatic. He understood something crucial. The dynasty could not be saved, but its fall could be managed. If handled carefully, China might avoid civil war. If mishandled, it could descend into chaos. Negotiations began between revolutionaries and imperial officials. The goal was simple and radical: persuade the Qing court to abdicate peacefully. Inside the Forbidden City, the child emperor remained isolated. Messages were filtered. Reality was softened. Adults spoke in careful tones, hiding the truth behind ceremony. Eventually, the decision was made for him. On February 12, 1912, an official document was prepared, the Abdication Edict. It declared that the Qing dynasty would relinquish power and transfer sovereignty to a new state, the Republic of China. The language was respectful, almost gentle. It spoke of unity, of peace, of the people's will. But beneath the polite phrasing lay a historical rupture of unimaginable scale. When Puai's seal was placed on the document, the Chinese Empire ended, not with an execution, not with a battle in the palace, but with ink on paper. Yet the abdication came with conditions. The former emperor was allowed to keep his title. He could continue living inside the Forbidden City. He would receive a stipend. The court rituals would continue, as if the empire were merely sleeping. So Puai did not feel dethroned. He still woke up in vast halls. Servants still bowed. Eunuchs still whispered, "Long live the emperor." The palace gates remained closed to the outside world. But something fundamental had changed. Beyond the walls, China was now a republic. Flags were replaced. New laws were written. Newspapers spoke openly of politics. The old world was gone. Inside the palace, time had frozen. Puai was no longer emperor of China. He was emperor of nothing, a ghost child ruling over memories. And the most dangerous thing was this: no one explained it to him. Part 3. The Emperor Without a Throne. For years after the abdication, Puai lived as if nothing had ended. Inside the Forbidden City, the old rules still applied. Every movement followed ritual. Every word spoken to him was measured. He was surrounded by hundreds of eunuchs and servants whose entire identity depended on pretending the empire still existed. To them, the lie was survival. Puai grew up in a palace cut off from reality. He had no friends his own age, no normal education, no sense of how ordinary people lived. Punishments were severe, arbitrary, and often cruel, because cruelty had always been part of power. As a child, he learned that anger brought obedience. If he threw a tantrum, servants were beaten. If he smiled, rewards followed. The lesson was simple and poisonous. His emotions controlled other people's pain. This shaped him deeply. He became insecure, temperamental, and lonely. The palace raised him to be an emperor, but the world outside had decided emperors were obsolete. Everything changed when a foreigner entered his life. In 1919, a Scottish scholar named Reginald Johnston became Puai's tutor. For the first time, someone spoke to him honestly. Johnston taught him English. He introduced him to bicycles, clocks, glasses, and the idea of punctuality. He explained that time moved forward. That history did not stop at palace walls. Most shocking of all, Johnston treated Puai not as a divine being, but as a human. This cracked the illusion. Pui began to understand that he was not truly emperor anymore. The titles, the bows, the ceremonies, they were theater. Outside the Forbidden City, he was irrelevant. The realization was devastating. He tried to modernize the court. He cut his queue, the traditional braid that symbolized loyalty to the Qing. He dismissed thousands of eunuchs, exposing decades of corruption. He spoke of reform, of dignity, of becoming a modern man. But it was too late. The palace was rotting from within, and the republic outside was unstable and weak. Warlords controlled the countryside. Beijing itself was vulnerable. In 1924, during a political crisis, soldiers entered the Forbidden City. This time, there were no negotiations. Pui was ordered to leave. He was 18 years old when he walked out of the palace gates. Not as emperor, not as ruler, but as a private citizen who had never learned how to live as one. For the first time, the sky above him was not framed by palace walls. Freedom should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like falling. Part 4. The Puppet Emperor. Once outside the Forbidden City, Pui discovered a brutal truth. The world did not know what to do with a former emperor. He had no profession, no country, no purpose. The Republic distrusted him. Warlords saw him as a bargaining chip. Monarchists dreamed of restoring him, but had no real power. Everywhere he went, he was watched, and watching most closely of all was Japan. In the early 1930s, Japan was expanding aggressively into China. Its military leaders believed China was weak, divided, and ripe for domination. In Manchuria, rich in resources and strategically vital, Japanese troops staged an incident and occupied the region. What they needed next was legitimacy. They found it in Pui. Japanese agents flattered him, protected him, whispered promises into the deepest wound of his identity. You are still the son of heaven. They spoke of restoring his throne, of dignity, of history correcting itself. Pui wanted to believe them. In 1932, under Japanese control, the state of Manchukuo was proclaimed. At first, Pui was made chief executive. 2 years later, he was crowned emperor. Once again, he wore imperial robes. Once again, officials bowed. Once again, he sat on a throne. But this throne was hollow. Real power belonged to the Japanese military, especially the Guangdong Army. Every decision was approved by Japanese advisors. Every movement was monitored. Even his food was controlled. He was emperor in name only. The capital, Changchun, was rebuilt as a showcase of modernity. Wide boulevards, electric lights, grand buildings. It was meant to look like progress. But beneath it lay exploitation, forced labor, and brutal repression. Pui sensed a trap, but could not escape it. By now, his entire life had taught him dependence. He had never learned to resist power, only to inhabit its symbols. When Japan demanded loyalty, he complied. When they demanded silence, he obeyed. History would judge him harshly for this. Yet the tragedy is this. Pui was not a mastermind or a tyrant. He was a man shaped by isolation, stripped of agency from childhood, desperate to matter in a world that had erased him. During the Second World War, Manchukuo became a militarized nightmare. Japanese rule grew harsher. Resistance grew stronger. The illusion of empire faded again. And in 1945, it all collapsed faster than anyone expected. The Soviet army swept into Manchuria. Japanese forces surrendered. The puppet strings were cut. For the third time in his life, Pwai lost a throne. This time, there would be no palace to shelter him, only judgment. Part 5. The Prisoner Who Became a Man. In August 1945, the world ended for Pwai one last time. As Soviet troops entered Manchuria, he tried to flee by plane. He never made it. He was captured by the Soviet Red Army and taken to Siberia. There, in cold rooms far from palaces and ceremonies, Pwai waited. For the first time in his life, no one bowed. He was questioned as a war criminal. He testified at the Tokyo trials, not as a ruler, but as evidence. The Japanese had fallen. His protectors were gone. The story he had told himself for years, that he had been restoring China's dignity, collapsed under scrutiny. In 1950, he was handed over to the new rulers of China, the Chinese Communist Party. Many expected his execution. Instead, something stranger happened. Pwai was sent to the Fushun War Criminals Management Center. It was a prison, but also an experiment. The communists believed people could be remade through ideological re-education. For 10 years, Pwai was forced to confront his past. He cleaned floors. He studied Marxism. He wrote self-criticisms. He listened as guards, once P's, once soldiers, explained how imperialism had crushed their families. For the first time, history was not a ritual. It was human suffering. At first, he resisted. Then he broke. And then, slowly, he changed. Something unexpected happened in prison. Pwai learned responsibility. Not divine responsibility. Not symbolic authority. Real accountability. In 1959, Mao Zedong granted him amnesty. The former Son of Heaven walked out of prison as a citizen of the People's Republic of China. No title, no servants, no throne. He worked as a gardener in Beijing. He took the bus. He queued. He fell in love. He married. He lived in a small apartment. He laughed at himself. When tourists later saw him guiding visitors through Forbidden City, the palace he had once ruled, they did not recognize him. That, perhaps, was the point. Before his death, Pwai wrote his autobiography, From Emperor to Citizen. The title says everything. He was born a god. He lived as a ghost. He died a man. And with him died the last echo of imperial China, not in flames, but in quiet understanding. Part 6. Silence After History. Pwai died on October 17, 1967, at the age of 61. He did not die as an emperor. He did not die as a public figure. He died quietly, as an ordinary citizen of the People's Republic of China. And the timing of his death mattered. China was deep inside the Cultural Revolution, a period of chaos, fear, and ideological violence. History itself was under attack. Old symbols, old books, old memories were being destroyed in the name of revolutionary purity. In that climate, Pwai's death passed almost unnoticed. There was no state funeral, no official mourning, no public reassessment. He was cremated. His ashes were placed in Babaishan Revolutionary Cemetery, a resting place reserved for those considered politically acceptable. An extraordinary irony for a man once labeled a war criminal and feudal relic. At the moment of his death, Pwai was not celebrated, but neither was he condemned. He simply disappeared. China after Pwai. After Pwai's death, Imperial China truly became past tense. Before him, emperors still existed as living memories. After him, they became abstractions, museum objects, textbook chapters, distant echoes. The Forbidden City itself underwent a transformation. Once a closed world of ritual and fear, it became a public museum. Children ran through courtyards where eunuchs had once trembled. Tourist photograph halls where emperors had ruled in absolute isolation. The palace outlived the empire, and so did the contradictions. Official Chinese history presented Pwai as a victim of feudalism, a puppet of Japanese imperialism, and ultimately a success story of communist re-education. This narrative was useful. It showed that even the Son of Heaven could be remade, but it was incomplete. The long reassessment. Only after the Cultural Revolution ended did China begin to look at Pwai again, slowly, cautiously. Historians started reading his autobiography seriously. Scholars compare his life to broader patterns of trauma, indoctrination, and loss of agency. Outside China, writers and filmmakers saw something else entirely. A tragedy, not of a villain, not of a hero, but of a human being crushed between systems too large to resist. His story became a bridge between imperial China and modern China, between absolute power and total helplessness, between myth and psychology. The emperor who ruled nothing had become a mirror. What remains? Today, Pwai's life is remembered less for what he did, and more for what it reveals. That power without freedom is a prison. That identity imposed at birth can deform a soul. That history does not end cleanly. It dissolves into people. The Chinese Empire did not fall in 1912. It did not fall in 1945. It truly ended in 1967, when the last man who embodied it died quietly, without ceremony. No dragons, no throne, only ashes. Part 7. Imperial Memory Today. Let us move slowly. Imperial memory in China today is not about wanting an emperor back. It is not nostalgia for silk robes or dragon thrones. It is something quieter, deeper, and far more persistent. It is about how power is imagined. 1. The empire as a mental structure. For over 2,000 years, China was organized around a single idea. The world has a center. In the imperial system, that center was the emperor. He was not just a ruler, but a cosmic point, the place where heaven, earth, and society aligned. Order flowed outward from him. Chaos was what happened when the center weakened. When the empire ended, this structure did not simply vanish. The belief that a vast civilization needs a strong center, clear hierarchy, continuity rather than rupture, remained embedded in political culture, education, and collective instinct. The symbols changed. The language changed. But the underlying fear fragmentation of disorder stayed. Imperial memory survives less as ideology and more as reflex. 2. Ritual without belief. Imperial China was built on ritual. Ritual taught people where they stood, how to behave, and when silence mattered more than speech. Today, most Chinese people do not believe in the mandate of heaven, but ritual itself did not disappear. You can still see it in highly choreographed public ceremonies, formalized language around authority, emphasis on dignity, order, and symbolic continuity. Ritual no longer claims divine origin, but it still produces psychological stability. In that sense, ritual outlived belief. This is one of the deepest legacies of empire. Even when faith collapses, structure remains. 3. The palace that refused to die. The Forbidden City is perhaps the clearest symbol of imperial memory today. Once, it was a forbidden, sacred center. Today, it is a museum visited by millions. Children run where eunuchs once whispered. Tourists take selfies where emperors ruled in isolation. Yet the palace still dominates Beijing, physically and psychologically. It was not demolished. It was not erased. It was absorbed. That choice matters. China did not destroy its imperial heart the way some revolutions destroy symbols. Instead, it preserved it, reframed it, and placed it inside a narrative of continuity. The empire was declared finished, but not treated as poison. For Pui as a moral lesson. After his death, Pui became something unusual. Not a hero, not a villain, but a lesson. His life is now used to say, absolute power dehumanizes even those who hold it. Tradition without accountability becomes cruelty. History is something people are born into, not choose. This is important. Rather than erasing the last emperor, China turned him into proof that the old system was unsustainable, but also tragic. That ambiguity is telling. It suggests a culture still negotiating its past, not denying it. 5. Empire without an emperor. Imperial memory today lives in paradox. Respect for history without restoration. Central authority without divine claim. Symbolism without monarchy. It is not a ghost demanding return. It is a deep echo shaping instinct. The empire did not survive as a regime. It survived as a way of imagining order, a quiet ending. When Pui died, imperial China ended biologically. But psychologically, empires do not die like people do. They fade. They rearrange. They leave behind habits of thought. And those habits move slowly, much more slowly than revolutions. That is the calm truth of imperial memory today. Not loud, not nostalgic, just present. Part 8. Imperial Ghosts. Stories still whispered today. These are not history in the strict sense. They are stories, rumors, nighttime memories, the kind that survive when facts fall silent. China does not officially encourage ghost tales, and yet the old places remember, especially the Forbidden City. 1. The palace that never truly sleeps. Security guards, cleaners, and night staff have long shared quiet stories. Never officially, never on record. They speak of footsteps in empty corridors, the faint sound of silk brushing stone, doors that seem open, then close again, a sensation of being observed, not threatened. The Forbidden City is enormous, nearly 9,000 rooms. At night, with modern lights dimmed, it becomes something else entirely, a maze of shadows and echoes. People say the palace feels crowded, even when empty, not haunted in a violent way, haunted in a remembering way. 2. The Shadow of the Last Emperor. There are occasional stories, always secondhand, of a solitary figure seen walking slowly near the inner courtyards. No crown, no robes of power, just a small man, hands behind his back. Some say this is the spirit of Pwai. The details are always similar. He appears alone. He does not look at anyone. He vanishes near the former residential quarters. What makes this story linger is not fear. It is sadness. Pwai is imagined not as a ruler haunting his domain, but as a man who never learned how to leave it. 3. The Crying Consorts. One of the oldest ghost stories predates Pwai by centuries. Visitors and guards have spoken of hearing soft crying near the inner palace halls, especially in areas once reserved for imperial concubines. Historically, many women entered the palace and never left, isolated from families, competing for favor, punished or forgotten. In legend, these women walked the palace at night, their faces unseen, their grief unresolved. This is not tied to a single emperor. It is the female memory of the empire, often silence in life, audible only in death. 4. Why these stories persist. What is striking is that these ghost tales never show violent spirits, no screaming apparitions, no revenge demons. Instead, they are repetitive, quiet, trapped, just like the imperial system itself. The empire did not end in fire. It ended in waiting. And waiting is what these ghosts do. 5. A cultural note. In Chinese tradition, ghosts often appear where lives were constrained, emotions were suppressed, endings were unresolved. The Forbidden City is not haunted because people died there. It is haunted because millions live there without living fully. That is why the figure most often imagined is not a powerful emperor, but a lonely one, a final image. If Pwai's ghost exists in the story, he is not demanding a throne. He is walking the same paths he walked in life, enclosed, ceremonial, unable to cross the walls, not terrifying, just unfinished. And perhaps that is the most honest ghost story of all.